Presentation. I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's going to be in English. So let me give my introduction. My name is Saugat and I teach at IACER. I'm a lecturer. I teach a course called Introduction to Philosophy and Policy to MA students. And besides my involvement with IACER, as the introducer said, I've also written novels. And it should be interesting to know that my upcoming novel, which I'm currently working on, is on science fiction in the Nepali context. And a lot of it is not technology focused, but policy focused. So looking at Nepal 50 years from now, what sorts of policies might be enacted, what will government look like, what will government presence look like. So those are some of the issues that I explore in my new novel. And yeah, I studied in George Washington University. And today's presentation is on deepfakes and democracy in Nepal. And deepfakes is a type of AI technology. I'll go into more detail later on. But it basically has to do with images and videos being manipulated and synthetically made by AI, by artificial intelligence technology. And with regards to democracy, I want to say that in my talk, I don't so much focus on the ideals of democracy, like freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Rather, I'm looking at democracy as a practice, as the conducting of elections, as the doing of election campaigns, as the doing of political debates between political rivals. So these practical aspects of democracy, what could we call everyday aspects of democracy, that's something that I am looking at in this presentation, not so much the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, these constitutional ideals. And why do I call it a philosophy and policy angle? Because you will see in the core of my presentation that I give a conceptual sort of framing of the problem of deepfake technology. What is going on with deepfake technology? I try to frame that in a conceptual way, in a philosophical way, and based on the words I use and the concepts I use and the relationship between them, we're going to try to explore some policy angles, some policy suggestions. It could go concrete, maybe in discussion it will go concrete, and we will actually have something to, say, oh, this should be done about deepfakes. But my point is that it's philosophy because of the conceptual side and a conceptual treatment of policy. So when I was talking to Pratyush sir about proposing this talk, one of the conversations we had was, what is the relevance to Nepal of AI? And that's a very viable question because, at least currently, even deepfake technology is produced mostly by Western countries. So Nepali firms, Nepali IT firms don't have the wherewithal, don't have the resources. And on the supply side, artificial intelligence is definitely a Western phenomenon. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that on the demand side or on the consumer side, we are going to be the consumers of artificial intelligence. And we already are in many respects because apps like TikTok and Snapchat, these already use the type of technology that I'm talking about. Maybe not in the Nepal context yet, but there's something called face swapping, which is a form of deepfake, manipulating images and videos that you can do on TikTok and Snapchat. And a lot of Nepalis use these apps. So we are on the audience side or the consumer side of artificial intelligence. So we should be part of the conversation. And my first point is that the normativity of disruption when it comes from Western economic centers. So when disruption happens from the West, like when there's the Industrial Revolution or when there's a Great War, we tend to adjust to it. We tend to normalize as people in the periphery. We tend to say, oh, this is something that is a given and we have to adjust to it. But the difference from previous disruptions like the Industrial Revolution and even the Great Wars is that now the periphery, places like Nepal, have more of a voice and more of a platform. So if we dislike some sort of technological progress, we can say something about it and we can inform the debates on it in a meaningful and proactive way. So one thing I wanted to mention is that if we are engaged with Western disruptions like AI from the start, like right now it's just starting, AI is just starting in the world. If we are involved in that from the start, we won't have such a bitter tone and such a, a resentful attitude towards the West later on in our politics. So if we're engaged in the process, we won't be thinking in terms of dichotomies like West and rest, or developed and developing, core and periphery. So that could be something that would be useful in the future. And anti-Western bias can be stopped. I'm not saying everyone must stop an anti-Western bias, but if we have discussions on emerging trends that come from the West, there's a chance that anti-Western bias might not take place. So that's a good thing. And so another thing that we should keep in mind is that places like the US, UK, and the EU are already developing AI regulations. So I looked in depth at the US part, and I saw that there were a lot of examples of regulations meant for AI specifically. And these examples include the Create AI Act of 2023, Real Political Ads Act, and the Deepfakes Accountability Act of 2019. So one thing to note is that already in 2019, the United States was worried and concerned about the use and proliferation of AI, especially deepfakes, the technology we're talking about today. Another thing is that major summits are taking place on AI across the world. Maybe you've seen this in the news. And one very recent summit was in the UK, where big tech leaders and world leaders came together just to have an initial preliminary discussion on the direction of AI, like where is it going to go in a few years? Are jobs at risk or not? So these sorts of very broad and initial discussions were taking place in the Western centers of the world. And so if discussions are taking place, if regulations are already there, then we are already a bit left behind in the conversation around how AI should be and the policies that should be pursued by government around AI. So we don't have a stance yet. For example, the US, I just said, has 3 regulations on AI. It's basically about curtailing the use of AI. And the UK, on the other hand, is more pro-AI. They're looking at it from an economic perspective. They're saying, oh, if we have AI companies here, jobs will be created. So they have stances, they have positions on AI. And we as Nepalis need to have our position as consumers of AI primarily, but also, if we can, as producers of AI. So we need to have a stance. So Nepal also needs an overall stance. And it cannot borrow this stance from the rest of the world. So contexts are very different from the US, from the UK and Nepal. So even though discussions are going on regulating AI in these Western places, Nepal needs to have its own stance attuned to its own population and its realities. So these stakeholders, the big tech companies and US, UK, EU, they may come to shape global AI policy without an adequate understanding of the global consumer base. So they may put up regulations that decide what sorts of AI services get made and don't get made, and we don't have a stance on that. Maybe there's a positive AI for Nepal, but we don't get to say to Silicon Valley, don't make this AI or make this AI, so we don't have a voice, a stance. And that's a problem. If they're shaping the global AI policy, and we get progressively more left behind. And another thing I should say right at the beginning is that not all AI is negative. A lot of what you see in the videos on YouTube and news is on the negative consequences of AI. A lot of focus is on the alarming side of AI. But we want to benefit positively from AI as well. So if you imagine some sort of say from Nepal, some sort of advocacy from Nepal to the Western centers of power that says, make this sort of AI because it would benefit us. So if Nepalis say that, then that would be a good thing. That would be a very helpful thing for the Nepali population. So my point is we need to have some sort of say in the conversation, and the time to begin is really now. So that's why I think a discussion on AI is relevant for the Nepal context. So an example of a positive use of AI is the Create AI Act of 2023. It was passed in the US, and So what this act enables is public access to AI through access to cloud computing resources. So the government is in charge of cloud computing resources, and small businesses and institutions, colleges, universities can access that resource and use AI in that way, because AI is a very resource intensive thing. And so if we have some sort of database or some sort of availability of cloud computing, then maybe businesses here could benefit from the use of AI. And like the UK, maybe that would have positive impacts on the economy. And lastly, Nepal can follow up on community organizations of people of color in the West, which are already pointing out the harms of AI to the marginalized. So there's a lot of NGOs and community organizations, even affiliated to big institutions, that say that AI is harmful to people of color, or AI is harmful to certain races. And the example that's really dominating the news is facial recognition. So apparently facial recognition technology, which is found in cameras that use AI, it discriminates between people of color and white people. So community organizations are already pointing that out in the US. So if we say AI is harmful, we wouldn't be saying something new, something like untested. We can follow up on what community organizations and people who think of the welfare of society as a whole are already saying. So we can be part of that process. But the problem is that Western organizations, although they critique AI, might be focused on the Western context. So maybe in Nepal context, facial recognition is problematic in a different way, not in terms of race, maybe in terms of caste, maybe it's just in terms of economic class. So you have a camera on the street and it looks at people, and maybe people who are driving, upper class people who are driving, don't get recognized, don't get scanned by that camera, but people who are walking, people who are poor, who don't have resources, maybe they are more likely to be discriminated against. So we should always be attuned to our realities, to Nepal context, but we can also learn from and really back up the activists that are already saying this in the Western context. So not all AI is negative, like I said, and another case where AI is already being problematized in the West. In Hollywood, screenwriters and scriptwriters went on strike because they thought AI was going to take their jobs. So that's another case where people are already finding the harms of AI and are really trying to understand, will it make a better world or will it make a worse world? And in my opinion, there's no better point to be part of the conversation on AI than now. And so one of the reasons for this talk is really to try to be a part of the conversation and also encourage the conversation going forward. So the topic of this talk is deepfakes. Deepfakes are a type of AI technology that generate an artificial or synthetic image or video by using a form of AI called machine learning. And within machine learning, there's deep learning. So I don't want to get into the technical specifics of this, but a deepfake is an artificial image or a video, and it is generated using machine learning, particularly deep learning. And like other kinds of machine learning, in deep learning, an algorithm is fed example input, which it learns from and generates a suitable output. So it's fed an image of someone, a popular celebrity or something, and it learns to mimic from that image. So something like that goes on in deepfakes. So the process of creating deepfakes involves two algorithms, one for producing the deepfake, and I'll give an example of what a deepfake looks like, and the other for recognizing fake versus real output. So these two algorithms work together, iterating back and forth, so that the real-looking deepfake is produced as output. So one algorithm produces an image of some popular celebrity or politician. The other one looks at it and decides whether it's fake or real. And until this one decides it's real, that test is not passed. The output is not generated. So it gets very convincing. Like, you can have very convincing examples of deepfakes because they're using two algorithms in an adversarial relationship. That's what they call it technically. And so, so the technology is quite advanced. But besides the technical aspects, part of the problem is also where the fake image video eventually appears. Like I said, in TikTok and Snapchat, you could make a deepfake video. A deepfake video could appear on YouTube or some lesser known outlet. It could occur in the news when a newswriter mistakenly cites it as real, but it's actually fake. So a major part of the problem is really where this video appears. So it can be supported with a catchy headline. So one deepfake was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying Ukraine should surrender to Russia. So this was a fake video, but it was such a catchy headline, so people are going to click on it and think it's real, and so that's a problem. And so, so some troubling cases in Nepal of deepfake use might be when a photo of a prominent politician is seen taking a bribe. So there's a picture and you see a prominent politician and he or she is taking a bribe. So it's a fake picture. AI generated it, but people don't know about that. So that's a problem. And another example might be a video or audio. So deepfakes is not just images, it's also video and audio. Fake video and fake audio, thanks. So a video or audio of a prominent politician making misogynist statements. So a prominent politician is saying something really controversial and sensitive to a lot of people, but it's a fake video. So the problem, of course, is that the platform in which it appears means that it might get a lot of views, it might have a lot of consequences and impact. And the timing is also key. So if it's around election time in Nepal and you have a fake video of a politician or candidate taking a bribe or doing something negative, then it's going to tarnish his or her image and impression in the general public. So that's another problem. So, and one thing is that right now the current technology is such that only these big firms in the West and other places can produce deepfake videos. It's not readily available to everyone, partly because of the resources that it needs. But in the future, experts say, like in interviews I've watched, experts say that in the future deepfakes can be made quite easily, and any person with a computer can make it quite easily. So, so that's another problem, is how easy it is to create. And AI can itself detect deepfakes, so if there's a fake image of someone, AI can detect it. But the technology is not that advanced because it doesn't work so well for low resolution photos. So if the photo is unclear, then AI won't be able to tell, oh, is it fake, is it real, is it actually Donald Trump in prison, is it not Donald Trump in prison? It can't decide that. So if we don't get the technology right on that and those fake images spread, then it's a real problem. Yeah. So these are examples of deepfakes. I don't know how convincing my explanation was, but these are popular actors, right? This is Nicolas Cage, a real photo of Nicolas Cage, a fake photo. He looks much younger. But the thing is, if this is a video, then he will be saying things in Nicolas Cage's voice, right? So this is real. The AI machine does something. It creates a fake video, and Nicolas Cage could be saying all sorts of things there, right? And on this side, this is the original, right? It's a Tom Cruise impersonator, actually. So this guy does impressions of Tom Cruise, but then after he does impressions, AI is used, and the real Tom Cruise's face is put in this guy's body. And so it looks like it's actually Tom Cruise doing things like playing the guitar, he does things like that. But it's actually an impersonator with AI technology making the face look like Tom Cruise. So as you can see, very convincing, especially in images. You wouldn't be able to tell if that one particular is a deep fake. There are some ways to tell, like if you look at eye movements and hair and stuff like that, you can easily tell, but it's quite convincing. And in low resolution images, it's even more convincing. So this is what the technology is doing. It's using a real person, mapping it onto a body of a different person, the face onto a body of a different person. And so voice can also be mimicked. And so just to think about, you know, Tom Cruise might be endorsing something there. He might be endorsing a presidential candidate. And it's not him. So, you know, that's a big problem, as we know. And not all uses of it are negative. This is a link to a video. I don't have time to show it now, but in this video, a song of peace, imagined by John Lennon, is sung by all the world leaders. So Putin, Theresa May, all these big leaders, Justin Trudeau, all these leaders sing the song imagined by John Lennon. And it was actually created by a company, an AI company, to show the positive uses of deepfakes. So it's not all negative, but in policy you have to kind of balance that. Is it positive more? Is it negative more? You kind of have to know that. So these are examples, and there's plenty of examples on the internet if you want to look on your own. So now getting more to the core of my presentation. I don't know why the font is like that. By the way, I have a lot of text so that people can follow even if I'm digressing. So I'm basing my presentation primarily on Al Jazeera's report called "Could AI Threaten Democracy?" And this is a very good report. It's mainly focused on the Western context, on the US, and examples of a lot of harmful use of deepfake are there. So I would recommend people to take a look at this report. And in this, the role of AI on elections and other political practices have been examined. And the reason Al Jazeera does this report is that it's very timely. It's right on time for the US elections. So elections are in 2024. A lot of deepfakes are in the web, so they're looking at the impact of that and trying to see whether potentially the election could be influenced by this technology. So this technology is at the heart of the election cycle in a sense. In one segment, the Al Jazeera report uses AI-generated images of a US presidential candidate to make the point that potential voters are not completely able to identify which image was AI-generated, fake, and which came from human agency. So the reporter basically has two pictures, two photographs, and one is a real photo. One, someone might be giving a speech, and it might be a significant speech, and that's a real photo. And the other one is a fake photo, similar photo, but slightly different. Maybe that person is holding a book. Maybe that person is, in some way in a harmful situation. But this is fake, this is real, but audiences can't decide. It's very arbitrary. Like some might think the real photo is fake, some might think the fake photo is real, so it's very confusing. So that's why it's a big problem. And this might obviously be risky for democracy as a practice. Again, I wanted to emphasize democracy, its practical aspects, like election campaigning, debating, things like that, rather than its ideals like freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And this is risky for democracy as a practice because published visual images are usually accepted as real by the audience. So if you look at an image, you trust your eyes and you think, oh, it's a real photo. And so that's the problem. And the second problem is really the platforms where these images are published. So it can have a lot of consequences. So that's another problem. So a very timely report, and that's what I wanted to say about democracy. So now for a little bit on the philosophy part. Like I mentioned, I wanted to do a conceptual elaboration of the problem. And framing the problem conceptually, it seems that the problem of having fake images, deepfakes, is the exposure of the audience to the content. And I really wanted, this sounds counterintuitive, this definition, exposure of the audience to the content. It should actually be exposure of the content to the audience. But I wanted to make it counterintuitive to give the sense that in public policy, it's the audience that's the primary recipient, the primary priority. So if you look at policy analysis, you will see that the audience or the public is imagined in some sort of norm. So if you look at a study on maternal mortality, you will find that some norm is accepted, like, oh, maternal mortality should be this much, but it's this much. So the public or the audience is the prime priority. So I'm really trying to stress that the audience is primary focus and the content is disruptive. So deepfakes are disruptive while the audience is static, imagined as secure, and they're the ones we are making public policy for. So in other words, they're the recipients of the technology, And the target of the policy and the target of the policy is the technology. So yeah, that's what I mean. We put the audience first and not the content there from a public policy standpoint. The audience is our prime priority. The audience or the public is our prime priority. So given the problem, given how I framed the problem as exposure of the audience to the content, one policy move might be to limit exposure. So one way we can do this is if we, sort of regulate the social media platforms where deepfake technology is prevalent. Yeah. So given the problem, one policy move might be to limit exposure. For instance, a national government may block access to certain deepfake services around election time, as it can do with social media. So I think this is the rule in Nepal, where certain days before an election day, you can't advertise in social media. So maybe something like that for deepfakes could occur. That's a policy point where we're trying to regulate the exposure. So if deepfakes are circulating in TikTok a lot, maybe we say don't use TikTok before 2 weeks before the election. So that could be a way of that could be a favored policy option of really tackling the problem of deepfakes. But the problem is that the intent to limit exposure is good, but it is difficult when the audience is so active in social media platforms, and also the content creators are harmful, have a harmful intent. So they might find certain social media websites that aren't regulated by the government and promote their content there. So limiting exposure is a good idea, but it's not a foolproof idea. So that's the problem with the first policy prescription. Another policy option is focusing on the content side. So rather than limiting the exposure of deepfakes, really focusing on the deepfake creation itself, really focusing on the AI services and firms that create deepfakes, or individuals that create deepfakes themselves. So Google has said that all political ads which have been synthetically produced or using AI will be required to have a disclosure that they were made using AI. So this is a good way of regulating the content, because if the deepfake video, if the video of Tom Cruise had a watermark that said, oh, this is made by AI, then consumers would really know what they were consuming. They wouldn't be fooled by it. So that's a good way of regulating the problem of deepfakes on the content side. So the content is labeled and the public will know what it is consuming. This might be helpful in certain respects, but Google is not the only platform out there that the public is using. Disinformation through deepfakes can spread elsewhere, just not in Google. So if you think of an example where you go to a political rally or a speech in Nepal, in Turikhel or somewhere, in Radnabad, and there's a big screen, and there's a video that they're showing, but actually that video is fake. And they're not telling you about it, and you're in the audience, you're thinking the video is real, and so that kind of problem, that public exposure problem is there. So it's not just about people using their personal computers and consuming this material. There's different scenarios where deepfakes can be exploited for political gain. So focusing on the content side is also not foolproof. So now comes my final policy prescription, and which I think is controversial but at least worth considering, and this is the audience side. So rather than thinking of the audience as safe and secure and the recipient of public policy, we can make the audience the target of public policy. So this is the difference that I wanted to emphasize. And for this, I wanted to look at a potential voter's mindset. I assigned a mental logic to a potential voter looking at a particular image. So a voter is looking at a politician taking a bribe, an image or a video of a politician taking a bribe. And a very arbitrary mental calculation goes on in the potential voter's mindset when he or she is trying to evaluate whether the image is real or fake. So he might be thinking, oh, there's a crowd behind that politician, so maybe this image is real. Maybe AI isn't good enough to produce an image where there's a crowd behind the politician. Or he might be thinking, oh, there's a very shiny poster behind the politician, and so this image is fake. This looks fake, so it's fake. A very gut reaction, an instinctive reaction takes place. And this shows that, and this happens because the moment of decision making is very urgent, is very short. So you're looking at an image and you have to decide right away, am I looking at a real image or a fake image? So because of that, there's a problem that we have an arbitrary and jail. You're going to say, no, that can't be that politician. He's a good guy. He can't be in jail. That image is fake. But if you dislike a politician and if you see an image of him in jail, you're like, oh yeah, I don't like this politician. You motivate your response. You sort of inform your response with your bias. So I don't like this politician. He's in jail. Of course he's in jail. He's a bad guy. So it might be that both images are real. One of them might be fake. One of them might be real. So that's a real problem when we just rely on our minds, on our eyes and ears to try to evaluate whether a deep fake is real or not. So it's a real problem today. So people alone, is my point, is that people alone can't be left to their own resources, their own mental judgments to understand and evaluate whether an image is real or fake. So that's why I think some sort of audience-based policy is needed. Something that takes the audience as a target rather than a recipient of policy. But is audience-based policy a controversial idea? What do I mean by audience-based policy? Really something that regulates our bodies. Something that says, from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, don't consume deepfakes. If you're below 18, if your body is below 18 years of age, don't consume deepfakes. So something that really asks us to control ourselves or controls ourselves from outside so that it's us that is the target of the policy. But is this a controversial idea? And so we can envision a policy-making narrative. So as such, it entails certain everyday practices. So if you think about policy-making as a narrative, you're thinking about governments making policy and really thinking of what is the ideal that we want to reflect in our policy? What is our values that we want to reflect in our policy? So at a legitimate point in the policy narrative, for instance, one where policy making itself reflects the ideal of democracy for policymakers, the governments of democratic nations step into the debate and enact policy which, it turns out, could be quite content-focused as opposed to audience-focused. What I'm trying to say simply is that for governments like the US and Nepal, democratic governments, there's a certain point at which they must act as public policy actors. And this is before they act on the audience. So if they act too late, if the problem of deepfakes and AI is too pervasive or social media use is too toxic, if they act too late, then they have to act on people's bodies. And that is not very conducive to democracy. But if they act at the right time, as the US and the UK are doing right now, they can act on the service, they can act on the technology and not act on the people. Because acting on the people is controversial and goes against some of our democratic ideals. So that's basically what I'm trying to say here. So an example is the recent executive order from the US president where an executive intervention into the field of AI focuses on protecting the audience from the harms of AI. So think about the timing of this policy. If it had come too late, if people were already using AI and there was all sorts of harms, then government would have no choice but to be like, we need to regulate bodies. We need to tell people what to consume and not to consume. We need to make people's decisions for them. We can't let people rely on their own eyes, ears, and minds. So if they had acted too late, that would have been the policy choice. And that wouldn't be democratic. So they act at the right time when they can act on the technology rather than the people. So this is how I think the policy process works in a democratic nation. So an audience-focused policy making is not that strongly proposed. The vehicles of policy proposal are focused on content control. So at a certain point in the playing out of the problem, so this deepfakes problem, as it plays out, at a certain right point, we can focus on the content. And we don't need to focus on the audience, we don't need to target the audience. So that is something that I think we are doing right now, I think Western nations are doing right now in regulating AI, in regulating the technology of AI, not the consumer base of AI. So finally, I wanted to say something on audience-based policy and what it means to regulate audiences' bodies, eyes, ears, and minds. So a drastic extreme case might be government officials just saying, we ban, we don't allow you to look at this website, we don't allow you to hear this content. So very focused on the subjective experience. But another way that audience control or bodies of audiences are controlled is through the involvement of the medical establishment. So regulating content and attempting to mediate exposure is not enough, so the medical establishment, hospitals and clinics, and not just urban but also rural, need to be aware of the appropriate cases of intervention into a patient's body in order to regulate his, her eyes, ears, and mind. So rather than thinking of government officials, abstractly doing the regulation, government enlists the medical institutions, the hospitals and clinics and the doctors, and makes the health policy in such a way that people's consumption of AI is regulated. And this is not focusing on the technology or the exposure. The technology can be out there, but people are not consuming it, and that's the prime target. So that is my proposal for an audience-focused regulation of AI, particularly this case of deepfakes. And it could be controversial to say to someone, you can't consume this or you can't hear that, but at the same time, if we act too late and the problem is pervasive, we might have to come to that option. So, so that's something I wanted to say. We're running out of time, so I didn't touch on everything. And one good thing about Nepal is that we Nepalis aren't so sensitive to the idea of governments being very interventionist and regulating our bodies for us. We did not have vaccine deniers. We wore masks when there was COVID, and these came from government policy. And so we are pretty receptive to governments. Regulating our bodies for us, with us. And so it's not such a big deal to think of audience targeting policy. So that's what I want to say in the end. There's a virtue associated with the medical establishment which we should use as policymakers. So we usually put doctors and nurses in a good light, and health policy should really exploit and capitalize on that fact. And one of the places it should do that is around AI use. And yeah, that's what I want to say. We didn't have so much time, so I didn't go through all the points.
Saugat Bhattarai, अब चाहिँ हामी छलफल खुला कुराकानी गरौँ। तपाईहरुलाई केही जिज्ञासा छ भने अथवा आफूलाई त्यो बारेमा थाहा छ भने त्यो पनि कुरा मिलिहाल्यो।